The last day of death row. Inmate Frances Newton. An unwavering claim of innocence. Hello, friends. Tonight we revisit one of the most haunting cases in Texas history. On September 14, 2000, Frances Newton became the first black woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. To the very end, she insisted she was innocent, no confession, no apology, not even final words. Prosecutors painted her as a cold and calculating woman who killed her husband and 2 young children for life insurance money. Supporters saw something else: flawed forensics, unanswered questions, and a conviction built on circumstantial evidence. Outside the prison gates, voices clashed, some demanding justice, others pleading not to take the life of a woman they believed was wrongly condemned. But inside, the clock was ticking, and Frances Newton faced her final 24 hours. Was this the pursuit of justice, or the execution of an innocent mother? Stay with me, and don't forget to subscribe to Deathwatch Diaries for more prison documentary stories. Frances Elaine Newton was born in 1965 in Houston, Texas. As a child, she was described as quiet and polite, a girl who rarely got into trouble. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood where families fought to keep food on the table, and opportunity was scarce. Yet Frances showed intelligence and determination. Teachers noted her potential, and those who knew her remembered a young woman who seemed destined for a simple, steady life. But adulthood brought challenges. By her early 20s, Frances was entangled in financial problems and poor decisions that would shadow her future. In 1986, just a year before tragedy struck, Frances was convicted of forgery. She had altered documents to gain money she had not earned. The charge wasn't violent, but it painted her as deceptive and left her with a reputation that prosecutors would later use to devastating effect. She was given probation, but the record followed her, and in a courtroom, it would be revived as proof of her alleged willingness to manipulate and betray. Despite setbacks, Frances tried to build a family. She married a young man named Adrian Newton, and together they had 2 children, 7-year-old Alton and baby Farah. To neighbors, they seemed like any struggling young couple, balancing jobs, parenthood, and bills. But behind closed doors, the relationship was cracking. Adrian was rumored to be using drugs. Friends testified that arguments were frequent, tensions high. Both Frances and Adrian were said to be involved with other partners. In this fragile environment, distrust grew, and decisions were made that would later take center stage in court. Weeks before the murders, Frances purchased several life insurance policies, one for Adrian, one for baby Farah, and one for herself. Alton was already covered by a previous policy. In total, the policies amounted to over $100,000, with Frances listed as the sole beneficiary. She claimed it was a mother's precaution, a way to provide for her children should tragedy ever strike. But prosecutors saw something far darker: a motive. Adding to suspicion, investigators later discovered that Adrian's signature had been forged on the paperwork. Then came April 1787. That evening, Adrian's brother Sterling stopped by the apartment. Frances asked him to leave so she and Adrian could talk privately. Not long after, Adrian received phone calls from a girlfriend, and later from a friend. Both recalled odd details: Frances's sharp tone in the background, or silence on the line that stretched nearly an hour. These fragments became critical pieces of the timeline. By 8 o'clock in the evening, the unthinkable had happened. Inside the small Houston apartment, Adrian lay dead on the couch, a bullet wound to the head. In the bedroom, little Alton was found shot in the chest, while 21-month-old Farah was killed in her crib. There was no forced entry, no signs of robbery. Whoever carried out the crime had walked in, pulled the trigger, and left everything else untouched. When police arrived, Frances was outside with her cousin Sandra, calm, steady, and dry-eyed. She told detectives she had just returned home to find her family already gone. Her words were simple: "I didn't do this." But her composure raised suspicion, and detectives quietly began to circle around her. The evidence mounted quickly. Investigators discovered a small .25 caliber pistol hidden in a blue bag in an abandoned house. Ballistics confirmed it was the weapon used in the killings. Cousin Sandra testified that Frances herself had carried that bag to the house, placing her directly with the murder weapon. To jurors, this was damning. There was more. Crime lab experts testified that Frances's skirt carried gunshot residue near the waistband, evidence that she had either fired a weapon or been close when it was discharged. The insurance policies were brought into the courtroom, highlighted page by page. Prosecutors pointed to the forged signatures and hammered the argument that Frances had plotted her family's deaths for money. The defense tried to counter. They reminded the jury that there were no fingerprints linking Frances to the gun. They argued that residue could have transferred from simply being near Adrian or the weapon. They introduced the shadowy figure Frances had named Charlie, a man she claimed was connected to Adrian's drug use and had threatened the family. Couldn't he have been the real killer? But Adrian's relatives were adamant. There was no Charlie. They insisted. Frances invented him to deflect blame. One relative delivered a chilling line that echoed through the courtroom. "There ain't no Charlie. She is Charlie." The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. On October 25, 1988, Frances Newton was convicted of capital murder. Days later, she was sentenced to death. She showed little emotion. For the state of Texas, it was justice. For Frances, it was the beginning of a long march toward execution. From 1988 to 2005, Frances lived in isolation at the Mountain View Unit, Texas's women's death row. Every day followed the same rhythm: small meals, routine checks, hours of silence. But outside her cell, lawyers and activists fought. They argued that her conviction was riddled with flaws, questionable forensics, circumstantial evidence, suppressed reports that could have supported her claim about Adrian's drug debts. Amnesty International, church leaders, and anti-death penalty advocates rallied. They insisted the evidence wasn't enough to take a life. In 1997, Frances came close to a new trial when her attorneys argued that prosecutors had withheld key evidence. But the appeals court denied the motion. Over the years, short reprieves were granted, only to end with the same result: conviction upheld, death sentence intact. By 2005, after 17 years on death row, Frances had run out of time. September 14th dawned with a finality no lawyer's motion could undo. Inside the prison, guards noted her calm demeanor. She refused a special last meal. No fried chicken, no desserts, just silence and control. She met with her spiritual advisor, her attorneys, and a few friends, comforting them more than they comforted her outside. Huntsville swelled with protesters and counter-protesters. Some held candles, praying for mercy. Others shouted for justice, demanding the state not delay. The clash of voices mirrored the divide that had followed the case for nearly 2 decades. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Frances Newton was led into the execution chamber. She declined to make a final statement. No words of remorse, no apology, no confession. Strapped to the gurney, her eyes fixed on the ceiling above, she waited as the lethal injection began. Within minutes, her chest stopped rising, her body still. At 6:21 in the evening, she was pronounced dead. Her silence was deafening. To some, it confirmed her guilt. To others, it was the haunting quiet of an innocent woman going to her death. Dear friends, stories like Frances Newton's remind us how thin the line can be between justice and error, between punishment and irreversible loss. Was Texas right to carry out her sentence, or did the state silence a woman who never stopped claiming her innocence? That question still lingers today. If you want more prison documentary stories like this, please subscribe to Deathwatch Diaries and join us again for the next final 24 hours.